And welcome back to our fourth lecture in our infection and infectious disease and epidemiology lectures. Today we will go over some biota and then get into our epidemiology portion. So I talked about biota before, and here we talk about normal microbiota. I kind of briefly talked about that it lived on our skin, that it lived in our eyes, everything. Okay, but it actually leads into our next topic that we will be doing pretty well, and that is innate immunity. And the fact that the normal bacteria take up a spot on our skin or in our gut prevents the spot from being taken by a more pathogenic species. Okay, so they can form a barrier just like that. Like that's just a small role, but it's a good one. They can prevent disease by other ways too, by kind of making it so that they outcompete it through the use of available sugars and available resources, available oxygen, and all the other stuff that we learned about in microbial growth. Okay, and so they can also contribute to our immune system and our health, and shaping our immune responses to these pathogens. Okay, so we need our normal microbiota. Remember the question, less than 1% of bacteria was actually pathogenic, okay, and most are probably more beneficial than they are harmful. Okay, even E. coli is way more beneficial in a scientific setting than it is detrimental, Yeah. So I talked about this. We have Staphylococcus epidermidis, right? It lives on the epidermis. Propionibacterium acnes, right? It's got acne in the name. Okay, so that's our leading cause of acne. Okay, and that is a normal microbiota. How does it create acne then? Is we, through puberty, develop, and other times of stress, produce more sebum than normal, stuff that grows out of our skin, and that feeds the bacteria, and the bacteria take advantage of that. And so that's how you do that. But we also have Corynebacterium in the eye. You might have heard of your cornea. So cornea bacterium. Okay. Oral bacteria, 700 species alone. Okay, so don't try memorizing all of those. But, know that you have some Streptococcus, some Porphyritis, and Gingivalis makes sense, right? Gingiva is our gums. Gingivitis is the inflammation of the gums. Respiratory tract, Streptococcus pneumonia, right? Pneumonia, influenza, all right? While influenza is a viral infection, Haemophilus influenza is a bacterial infection that probably mimics the same signs and symptoms as the viral type. Gastrointestinal tract, remember E. coli from the colon is there. All right, lactobacillus is also one. And then the urinogenital tract, we've talked about that a few times. Mostly sterile here, but the urethra and the genitals have their own microbiota. Okay, and lactobacillus is that notable one which helps maintain a low pH in the body. And then while we have some areas of microbiota, we have some sterile areas, and we need them to be sterile, right? We need our blood to be sterile, and in fact, if you get any bacteria in there, you get bacteremia or sepsis and can die. It's actually pretty bad. Okay, nothing in our blood. Cerebrospinal fluid, same thing. That was our day one, intro one. We took a CSF sample from a spinal tap, right? And to see if they had meningitis in there. They did not. They had that 1433 prion disease instead. So our CSF was clear, no bacteria. We have internal organs, heart, liver, kidneys, brain. They don't want bacteria either. Lower respiratory tract. I mentioned this one earlier also. There's new evidence that there's actually some bacteria in there, but largely it's not a big environment for bacteria. We want it largely sterile. Okay, and then obviously the muscles and bones free from bacteria from our muscles so we can move, and our bones so we can make nice big red blood cells. Okay, sterile areas of the body. Okay, and so now we get into epidemiology, and we learn about Jon Snow, and no, not from Game of Thrones. We learn about Jon Snow from England, and he would map out cholera, right? And you can see this map here. He took a city block and wrote the incidence, how much of the disease was there at any given time. And you had 12 cases here, 2 cases here, none here, 2 cases, none, 1, and you can see the idea, and you can then see where they got their water was this well. Where they got their water was this well. These wells were infected. Okay, that's the ghost map. Okay, because these people had to die, they had to get sick, and so you can kind of categorize it based on that. Okay, so this is the first stages of epidemiology, wondering where the disease was, who spread it first, how do we limit the spread. We got to stop that chain of transmission, right? And so if water is the reservoir, we got to make sure that it's not leaving the reservoir. Okay, we got to treat the reservoir or not let humans drink from the reservoir. Okay, and I brought up the term incidence. Again, it's another term heavy slide, but we need incidence versus prevalence. Okay, and this is best described when we look at HIV. Okay, remember I talked about HIV in the cocktail earlier and PrEP, and how you have antiretroviral therapy and you keep your viral loads down. Well, that's perfect, okay, because that means that they are prevalent with the disease. There's a population that has prevalence, okay, and note that it can go up. It goes up because they're living with it, okay, they're not dying with it, okay. Alright, so the prevalence is how many people at any given time have it. The prevalence from 1985 was here, the prevalence at 2010 is here, okay, it went up over time, okay, meaning that it's less and less and less lethal provided we have our antiretroviral therapy, okay, or a combined antiretroviral therapy, CART, okay? Now, that's prevalence. Incidence is the number of new cases, okay? How many new cases did I get in 1990? How many new cases did I get in 95, 2000, 2005, 2010? Note those numbers are really, really similar, okay? It's a really low source of infection. Not many people are getting new cases, so it's just the ones who are living with it that are basically increasing it. Okay, and this does increase it, but a graph like of COVID-19 that is much more lethal will have an incidence and a prevalence that's kind of mirrored of each other. The prevalence of it at a given time is mirrored to the incidence because in 2 days the patient dies, right? So it's kind of like that. Alright, so HIV is a really good example of it. COVID-19 is another example of it, but not as good at showing how people can live with the disease. And we get to another couple of slides here of definitions, and we have an epidemic, right? We have a pandemic, epidemic, sporadic, and pandemic, right? We have all these terms, and if it's endemic, okay, that it's endemic, endo, in a specific location. Sporadic, I get it randomly, right? Irregularly. That would be a good one for like tetanus, right? There's nothing really going to get it. Too infrequent. Epidemic, okay? Epidemic is a pandemic just that hasn't gone global yet. An epidemic would be a big area. And a pandemic is affecting global, okay? So pan means all, as in like Pan-Hellenic games, like Pan Am American games. All of the Americas, okay? And then we have emerging pathogens, okay, and re-emerging pathogens, okay? And what are those? Emerging pathogens are ones that have recently evolved to be pathogenic. Re-emerging ones are ones that we thought we had gotten rid of, right? And then now they're going to show up again, okay? And they're making our life miserable, okay? So we got emerging pathogens and re-emerging pathogens. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about any of the modern uh, ideals we got going on, modern infections we got going on. So COVID-19 is probably our most recent infection-based graph, and like I said, the incidence and prevalence rates are pretty similar until about here, right? Okay, and the prevalence means that they are starting to die more so than they can live with it, okay? So that's what that graph means, and makes sense because that was April of 20, right when it hit, and that was exactly when people started dying from our COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, and remember the pandemic started in China, spread to Italy, spread worldwide right after that, okay? Malaria in Florida is another big one, right around 20 in the summer. You can see June we had 4 confirmed cases of malaria. I didn't see it much after this, so they must have gotten it contained. That is an advantage of living in an industrialized modern society, that we can get rid of malaria in, before it ever even becomes a thing. And then finally we have some measles rates in 2023. That would be a re-emerging pathogen because more and more people are choosing not to get immunized against it. Okay, so we see some emerging pathogens, we see some re-emerging pathogens. Epidemiology is how we are studying the spread of these diseases, and epidemiologists love to see how they spread and all that good stuff. So with that, we will get into innate and adaptive immunity in our next lectures.